for those of you who don't know me, I'm James from Peachy. We're a digital creative agency, and we create strategy that drives growth, content that sparks connection, and user experience that converts. And it's our mission to create meaningful digital experiences that will inspire change. And we're lucky enough to work with some fantastic brands and companies that are doing really great things, and we're using our expertise to make them even more successful. And we know by making them even more successful, we can prove that business can be and should be a force for good. So with the outbreak of COVID-19, businesses are adjusting to the new normal. I mean, we're all adjusting to the new normal, and it's affecting us every day. So we've created this Stay Peachy session to help each other out and provide free advice during this time to navigate these uncertain times and adjust to this new normal. And today we are lucky enough to be joined by the superb Vanessa King.
Oh, you're too kind.
Lead Psychologist at Action for Happiness, author of The 10 Keys to Happier Living and 50 Ways to Feel Happy, which is a fantastic.
Oh.
And if you have children during this time, there's some really great activities in here to help them think more about how they're thinking, but also how I'm thinking as a dad. So yeah, highly recommend that one.
Thank you.
And Vanessa's going to be talking about our mental health during isolation, which I'm really excited about. We've been working hard on it at Peachy because it's key during this period for us to think about this. With that, Vanessa, I'll hand over to you.
Brilliant. So, and what I thought I'd do today is not get into loads of technicalities around the 10 keys and all that sort of stuff, but what to do is to kind of look at some sort of science-backed ideas and some practical ideas, some really simple practical ideas that we can play with during this time and maybe even beyond. When we look at the sort of science and the research about what enables us to be resilient, to cope with difficulties, cope with times are tough, is actually a lot of the same ingredients that boost our well-being, or indeed kind of enable us to kind of feel happy in the kind of fullest sense of the word. And as James mentioned, for Action for Happiness, I developed, and the title of this book for adults is 10 Keys to Happier Living. And we came up with this framework, which is the areas the science shows taking action in makes a difference to our own sort of happiness and well-being and that of others. And you'll notice that the acronym is Great Dream, by the way, and I'll point you to where you can find out more about this at the end. The acronym is Great Dream. And you'll notice that the R in dream is about resilience. And that's a lot about the way we think, but actually all the keys to happier living are actually also keys to resilience. So I'm going to play with a couple of these today and just see what you think. See if hopefully there'll be something that you can try. And I'd be interested to hear at the end of the session or in the chat things that you've been doing and how those work. But a lot of this is about triggering different systems in our primitive emotional brain. So a lot of our kind of instinctive emotional reactions are actually not in our human executive function forebrain, rational thinking mind. They're actually in our more sort of mammalian brain, a more primitive brain that we share with other animals. And there are three core kind of emotional systems. One is fear, the threat system. One is actually going out there, seeking, exploring, curious system. And the other is our calm and connect system. And then when we're in a kind of changing context, changing so we're not quite sure what's happening, we're having to do things in a different way, that's very easily triggering our threat system up. We can get fearful. And if we let that override, it can actually dampen down the other two systems. So what we need to do is to help us feel calm that threat system, and actually start to activate those other systems. So we're going to I'll talk a little bit about some of those ideas shortly, but that's what we're trying to do, is actually we're trying to trigger our calm and connect system, helps us feel good, helps us help other people feel good, and also then kind of that creativity, get things, the reward seeking. It means kind of when we're feeling a sense of progress, we're feeling like we're on top of things, those are kind of those sorts of rewards. But a lot of this, I think, at this time is about, and James, Megan and I were having a chat before, is maybe this time has helped many of us to think about, really focus on what really matters, and also what are the things that I can control. I can't control the virus, but I can control how I am, around other people, keeping a distance, etc. So it's kind of helped us channel things a little bit more. And having a sense of control is actually a really important thing for our well-being at any time, and particularly at these sorts of times. So that doesn't mean control of the whole everything in our lives, but just means small things. So taking constructive, positive actions. So that's what we're going to be talking about, some little positive actions that help us feel that sense of control and focus on what things matters. So firstly, and you will all know a lot about this right now, is that, you know, at a time when we are physically distant, we need to stay socially connected. And I'm on a bit of a campaign to change the phrase that's being used from social distancing to actually make it physical distancing. But we must stay socially connected, because for our sort of psychological well-being, you'll notice from the 10 keys that the first 2 are all around our connections with other people, and they are vitally important for our psychological well-being. And one of the kind of key ways around that, and I think this situation has really brought this out in spades, so it certainly has in my local community, is this idea of helping others. Our first key is around giving, which is, you know, ways of being kind. And we know that that when we do kind things for others, not only is it good for the other person's well-being, but it's actually good for our own well-being. There's this kind of reciprocal circle. It actually activates the reward centers in our own brain when we do kind things for other people. So I don't know about you, but I mean, certainly in my street, there's been really wonderful, tiny but wonderful examples of people helping each other out. I'm living in a London street. There's about 90 houses, completely mixed. You know, normally you might know your immediate neighbours, but you don't know anybody else because you're rushing off on the tube, blah, blah, blah. Well, actually, somebody set up a WhatsApp group at the start of all this. And through that, we found out in the street who's isolated, who's on their own, who's shielding, and we're checking in with them, you know, finding out local estate agent was collecting clothes and things for the homeless and food for the food bank. So that was put out there so we could all do things like that, which helps people because, of course, they've been sorting this stuff out, a lot of people. So it's a really interesting way of staying connected, but also helping each other. And one of the things, if we're stuck at home, to think about is one of the ways we can sort of be kind and help other people is A, by giving people a moment of attention, and B, by sometimes cutting people a slack. And if we're cooped up in a house with our nearest and dearest, or our flatmates, whatever the situation is, sometimes it's very easy to get ratty and stressed with them and the things that really niggle us. And we all have those things about the people we live with. But there's an interesting ratio. This was developed by a psychologist called John Gottman, who's one of the foremost, well, he is the foremost psychologist on relationships in the world. And he can predict good quality relationships that last from a kind of 90-second video clip of people interacting. And he said in those kind of positive relationships that are kind of good quality and last and kind of are happy for each other, is there's usually 5 kind of tiny positive interactions to every negative one. So for every criticism or niggle, there's 5 things. That could be just a little moment of attention, it could be a smile, it could be saying thank you, just tiny. He's talking about micro things, but it's really interesting thinking about what are our ratios with each other during this time, even on our phone calls and things. And I know there's been a lot written in the media and stuff about staying connected online, which is what we're doing right now, and using Zoom for family. We had a pub quiz on at the weekend with my extended family, which was fun. And we would never do anything like that normally. But I'm also quite interested in the kind of old school types of connections. And what I've found through this, through my street, was quite interesting. I've actually had COVID-19 and I had it really quite early. So I was on my own isolating for 2.5 weeks. And, you know, things like I had a friend ring me up one day and said, Vanessa, do you fancy a cauliflower and chickpea curry? I thought that would be nice. So, you know, an hour later, this little package arrived on my doorstep: homemade curry, homemade naan bread, raita, little serviette and little card. And it just was so nice. And there's been quite a series of these, I'm calling them doorstep drops at the moment. And then so I was inspired because I had a huge bag of mini chocolate mini eggs that I bought in advance for Easter, which is quite unlike me, but because I was going down to stay with some friends in Cornwall, and they've got kids love chocolate, so I had this huge bag of chocolate eggs, which I thought, well, I can't, I don't want to eat them all myself, and I'm obviously not going to Cornwall. So for Easter, I just packaged them up into some little bags I happened to have and dropped them around everybody that was on the WhatsApp group. And then a week later, I found this on my doorstep, which is a lovely vintage china plate and some homemade flapjacks and tea bags and a little hand-drawn card from somebody down the street saying, please enjoy a nice afternoon tea, which I just thought was lovely. And I've been sending, I happen to have some seeds or something like that. I've been sending little letters to people, particularly people I know who are in tricky situations or on their own, whatever. I've been sending out little things, and it's just been really nice. Those little things that we wouldn't normally do. And obviously a lot of us are sharing sort of memes and things that are funny or thoughtful, but really actually how do we curate those for each person and send them little personal messages? So all these things that make people feel seen, make people feel loved. So that's the kind of most important thing. So I mean, I'm doing these things, just sowing some seeds of ideas, but I'm going to go through a couple of really quick other things that I think I found useful at this time. Because one of the things that we do, and this is for us will be under the resilience in the dream and in the 10 keys, is how do we manage our mind? And there's lots of ways that we can do that. And there's a great, one of the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy said, human beings fantastic, but they're also really good at disturbing ourselves. So a lot of what's going on in our human brains, this is our forebrains, this is the one that's, can be creative, can plan, can create scenarios, but it's also really good at catastrophizing and ruminating and all that sort of stuff. And that triggers so we're triggering our threat system for ourselves. So a really simple technique that can be helpful. There's lots of different ways we can approach that, but one that I think is really super simple is to imagine if you find yourself ruminating or worrying on something that you can't do anything about right now, or you're just getting yourself sucked down into a kind of vortex, is imagine that being played out on the TV screen in front of you. Only you are watching, but imagine all your worries being played out on a TV screen. Now imagine, having done that, picking up the remote control, and you can change the channel if it's on a TV. So what would you change the channel to? And maybe think about a time when a place where you've been really happy and calm and felt sort of relaxed and in your element, not worrying about things. And start to take your mind right there. Imagine, what you're feeling, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, what you can touch. Really savor that. For me, I've been going to a very basic yoga place in the Southern Crete for a number of years, and it's kind of my place to go and reset. So I imagine there's a rock that I like to sit on, looking out at the sea, and I love the light in Greece. I love Greece, and that's my happy place. That's where I imagine. So I can change my channel there, take myself there, and then I can change my channel to take me back to the present time. So it's a really simple way of kind of just getting ourselves out of those worries and those ruminations that might be worth a try. So I'm just going to romp through a couple of other ideas. So one of the things that people have been saying to me about life in lockdown is this, it's kind of gets a bit monotonous. There's a kind of everyday blurs into one, and we were all kind of advised, and it was great advice right at the beginning, we got to set our routines. So I think that's really helpful. Again, that taps into that sense of control, having a bit of structure. But the human brain also needs, particularly like, we're triggering that sort of resource-seeking center of our emotional brain. Our human brain also needs a bit of variety. So if you've been doing some stuff for your, that is really good for your well-being, and you start to think, oh, it's not working quite as much, not getting quite as much a boost from it, then mix it up a bit. Variety really is the spice of life. And then you've done experiments, for example, when people were asked to do tiny kind things for other people, and they chose them, where people mix those ways of being kind up, they actually got much more of a boost from those things. And of course, if they're getting a boost, it's actually, chances are it's being better for the other people. You know, I notice myself, I'm lucky enough to live next door to a park, so I've been walking around the park, get a bit bored with that, try walking in the other direction, and then I think, well, actually I need to go on a different sort of walk or a different sort of outside exercise just to get those boosts. And it's an interesting experiment I'll share with you quickly that was done by Ellen Langer, a Harvard psychiatrist, and she got an orchestra of classical musicians who had classical musicians have a kind of, not quite a set repertoire, but they have a repertoire of classical, music that they play, which over time, must, sometimes get a little bit boring. So she did an experiment. She got them to record a piece as they would normally play it in normal concert. Then she got them to play the same piece, but she asked each musician to change something in their playing that only they would know. So tiny, because of course they've got to still play together as an orchestra, but change a tiny thing that only they would know. And they recorded both of those performances, and then they played them to general public, and they played them in different orders. And they found that the performances that the listeners rated better were the ones where they changed that were able to change something tiny that only they would know, and the musicians enjoyed playing more. So it's just that little tiny changes, tiny ways of mixing up our routines can actually make a difference. Nowadays, thinking about, particularly for spending long hours on our laptops, is thinking about how do we punctuate our day with a kind of positive pauses. You're going out on a walk, so I found myself sort of started to really notice minutiae. So these were kind of just random pictures that I took. I quite surprised myself actually by taking on my phone as I was walking around a park. I just happened to notice this beautiful sculptural or architectural plant with this tiny snail. But there are other ways. So that for me would be noticing beauty, and that's something that does give me a boost. But here's some sort of little suggestions for little tiny pause points in our day. There's research that's shown that when we if we're sitting working hard at something, if we take a 2-minute or a few minutes break, we are then more productive over the next hour. We might feel that actually I've just got to sit here and work, get on with this report or get on with this piece of work, that I've just got to get it done and sit there for 3 hours straight. But actually the research shows that we are more productive if we take a short break. Now, if we're in an office with lots of people around, sometimes our days are punctuated just with natural pauses, less so when we're working, for many of us working from home. So we need to be conscious about these little positive pauses. So I found things like, I found this lovely 5-minute dance lesson, African dance there, which you can Google. If you Google 5-minute dance lesson, African dance will come up. You can put on, have a little playlist with some really kind of mood boosting songs that you've chosen, that you can play one. Notice beauty, that's my thing. Reflecting on what's good that's around you. And these are again pictures from the very same park as the snail. And sometimes just saying thanks as I'm noticing that someone around you or somebody in a line has done something that you're grateful for. Just take a moment to tell them. And all of those things can kind of give you a little boost, switch your mind, give your mind a little bit of a rest and come back thing. And then finally, I think it's really important this time, and as we start to think about life beyond lockdown, all of these ideas I think are things that are useful, can be useful for people. I mean, different things work for different people, work during lockdown, but as we and also beyond, they're useful tools to have in our tool bag, if you like. But as we think about life beyond our own living rooms, is starting to think about sort of how do we cultivate hope. And I think one of they often say in a crisis is look for the helpers. This is triggering your calm and connect system, that even if things are going wrong, there are always really good people around that are doing positive things. Like Captain Tom's obviously one of those, but what is it about Captain Tom that we admire, that we could perhaps kind of emulate in our own lives, in our small ways, in our own local lives? And an exercise that I'd like to leave you with that you might want to reflect on, and you're having a lunch or in the evening or over the weekend, is thinking back. If you imagine 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, and you're looking back at this time, maybe you're telling your grandchildren about it or young kids about it, how would you describe it? How would you describe what you've felt and experienced during this time? And what was it that enabled you to kind of adapt to the changes and come through? And what did you learn about yourself that has really you've taken forward beyond the kind of time of the lockdown and the physical distancing measures into your life in general, into your work for yourself, that has really helped you sort of learn and grow as a person? So that's the kind of activity leave you with. And I just love this quote from John Kabat-Zinn, and this is true, kind of neuroscience shows this, that we can't stop what's happening around us, but we can learn to surf the waves a bit better. So Action for Happiness is, if you want to find out more, there's tons of stuff on our website. I'd really suggest signing up for the newsletters and stuff, because there's loads of great stuff there. This is our mantra for the period: keep calm, stay wise, be kind. There's, as James said, there's the book, the kids book. We've got our, if you sign up for the website, or you can download these for free, we've got these little monthly calendars, all based on science, with tiny actions that you can do each day. There's a map that has those actions, plus a lot of other boosting stuff. There's posters, there's all sorts of things. So that's enough from me, James.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vanessa. That was great stuff, as ever. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Does anyone have any questions? You can raise your hand or pop it into the chat room. I've got one, Vanessa. I mean, there's some great stuff there. And I really like the sort of changing the channel TV analogy. What advice do you have? Because sometimes when we are maybe in a little bit of a low patch, we don't realise and we can't notice it. What sort of advice would you give for sort of just being slightly aware that you're feeling down and sort of interrupting that thought process?
Well, I mean, sometimes having those little pause points can be really useful. One thing that might be helpful is actually just breaking where we are. So if we're sitting down, and particularly if we're sitting down long periods at our desk, that's actually the sitting is not great for us. So actually taking a moment, and you can even set a button, an alarm on your phone every hour to stand up and stretch, and then just take that moment to notice where we are. Some people use a kind of weather metaphor. Is what's the weather going on inside me right now? So it could be every hour, press an alarm during your working hours, alarm, stand up, stretch, which is really, it's really, really good for us, for our brains as well as our bodies. Sitting is not good for us and can leads to depression. It can if we extended periods. But stretch, and then just tune in. What's the weather going on inside me? What do I notice around me? Right, and then go back to the day. So just that, what's the weather pattern? And if we notice that we're feeling a bit down, what can we do? What's one of those other little positive pauses, whatever, put on a playlist, whatever, that we can do to kind of switch that? But it's not, I don't think we should avoid, we will have ups and downs in this. So this is not about feeling happy clappy all the time. It's just about noticing where we are. Yeah. And if we're feeling a bit lonely, for example, so lonely is no different to feeling hungry or thirsty. It means that basic human need for connection isn't there. So how do we reach out and connect people, even if we haven't got people physically? How do we connect with people? So it's they're little signals and telling you that you need to do something about it. So that's a good question.
I think that's great. I think that's sort of those actually noticing, I think is the first thing, but taking those little breaks and actually spending the time and the weather analogy, again, another great one. We've got a question here from Jessica. So any tips for balancing staying informed and with keeping a positive outlook? So staying informed with news and watching, reading, but just keeping that positive outlook.
So I would say, if choose what channels you're going to get your news from, what sources, and when you're going to do it. Do you really need to watch all the news bulletins, or can you just watch the news at 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock? I mean, 6 o'clock is probably better if watching your news is your thing. Or where are you going to get it from? And just limit it to that. And use your social media for connecting with real people that you know, or that you're building connections with. So not using it for kind of, I heard this phrase, doom scrolling. I think a lot of us were doing when this first kicked off. You look at, oh my God, and it doesn't do you any good. But you want to stay informed, so choose when and how you're going to do that. For me, the only news I listen to about 15 minutes of news in the morning, and I watch the 10 o'clock news at night, and and I'm not doing any other news in between, unless somebody says, oh, there's something big announcement. But if there's something major happening, somebody will tell me about it. So that's what I would do. And then focus on what you can control in your own life and for others.
I really like that doom scrolling, because that's it. We're all tuned into the negative aspect, I guess. But that infinite scroll is designed to be addictive. So if you're in that mode, then you're just going to keep going and keep going.
Yeah, and and it's and I think it's being really conscious of the good news sources. Who do you trust? Is it the BBC? Is it the is it the Guardian? Is it the Times? Whatever your sources are, what other online channels there are, and choose which ones, but make sure they're good. And it's interesting, things like, I know on the BBC that they ending all of their bulletins with a positive example, something good that's happening. And I think that's great. So, the other thing I would say is, come back to what I was saying before, is look for the helpers. Yeah. In all of this, when we're getting frustrated with the government's response, or what the American president's doing, or whatever it is that's winding us up, is actually then look for the helpers. Is a classic thing in these crises, is look for the helpers. What good are we seeing coming out of people? And that helps us sort of feel a sort of sense of connection, that there are good human beings out there. And it helps to balance the sort of natural negativity of the news.
Yeah, that's great. Great question, Jessica. Great answer, Vanessa. I stopped watching the news about 3 years ago, so I think you can gauge what's going on from social media. Cool. Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone. Again, thank you, Vanessa. Excellent half an hour spent with you. Next week we have Rose Whit-Mullins from Elisa Catering. She's going to be talking about pivoting from being a catering business to now being a delivery business. So really interesting story about having to transform a business. So that's next week. But thank you again, Vanessa. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll get this up onto our website and onto LinkedIn. But thank you again, Vanessa.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day, everybody.